Science Uncut, presented by the Volkswagen Foundation.
A bit more than 40 years ago, a small group of researchers dared to look into the future. At the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, they fed their computers with vast amounts of data. Data on population growth, industrial production, the depletion of resources. They summarized the results in a book that would become one of the most influential texts of the 20th century, The Limits to Growth. This study was commissioned by the Club of Rome and financed by the German Volkswagen Foundation. One of its leading authors was the economist Dennis L. Meadows. Back then, Meadows says today, the world still had two options: continue as before and face the enormous negative consequences, or change course and start on the path of sustainable development. We, the world, chose the first option, continue as before. And because we did so, the second option, sustainable development, is no longer a possibility. Now, 40 years later, we have come too far. We are beyond sustainable development. All we can and must do now is to develop strategies of resilience. Resilience, as Dennis Meadows understands it, is the ability to absorb intense shocks so that our lives can continue, at least in some ways, afterwards. 40 years after the publication of The Limits to Growth, the Volkswagen Foundation organized a conference with the title Already Beyond? 40 Years Limits to Growth. During the conference, experts looked at the effects of the study and what it means for us today. Dennis Meadows gave the opening address. His talk had the title, Feeling a Bit Uneasy? Limits to Growth and 21st Century Policies, Attitudes and Lifestyle. He gave the talk at the Herrenhäuser Conference of the Volkswagen Foundation in Hanover, Germany, on November 28, 2012.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to think about the first time I came here 40 years ago. In addition to all of his other merits, Eduard Pestel managed to have his personal apartment here in the Herrenhäuser Gardens. And I remember having breakfast with him and his wife at that time, looking out over the magnificent gardens which had been created by the Elector of Hanover. Neither Eduard nor I had any imagination that 40 years later such a meeting like this would take place. Prime Minister McAllister said that the Volkswagen Foundation was one of the principal supporters for our group. That's correct, but it was actually more. It was the only supporter. I couldn't imagine back in 1970 any other foundation having enough vision, flexibility, and autonomy to give such a large sum of money in those days to a crazy group in MIT who somehow imagines that working with the Club of Rome, they will put all of humanity into a computer model and find out something useful about the future. Fortunately, the foundation, Volkswagen Stiftung, was willing to do that, and now we're here to reflect about the results. The box that we have created for ourselves is called Sustainable Development. I'm going to talk about that box today and try to take your thinking outside so that we can start to have a constructive discussion about what's actually coming. Here are the three main ideas for this talk. First, in 1972, when we first published the project results from the Volkswagen Stiftung Club of Rome project, there were two possible futures for the globe, which I may very approximately call overshoot and sustainable development. To get sustainable development required changes. We didn't make those changes. Instead, at the global level, at the national level, typically also at the municipal level, we pursued growth, and with great success. By and large, as you will see, we managed to double population, industry, and so forth since that first book came out. But the result is that sustainable development is no longer a possible future. We have to look outside that box and examine other possibilities. Two of the urgent tasks will be to start thinking about a lifestyle which uses much less energy and materials. It can still be an attractive lifestyle, but it will be very different. And we need to start increasing the resilience of our systems at all levels. In 1972, our book published a set of pictures about possible futures. Roughly half of those pictures showed overshoot, and half showed some sort of sustainable path. Notice that in 1972, we were still with 4 decades of growth possible. So in 72, we didn't expect immediate decline. We imagined that only in this century, sometime between 2020 and 2040, we would start to see serious problems. Now we are just here. We said in 1972 that if we made really big changes to stop physical growth, we would have the possibility to create a system which could exist for a long time. But we didn't stop physical growth. In 1972, we were at about 3.6 billion. We said it's necessary to slow down. You could see our book had enormous influence on global population. Not only population, but also all of the industrial activities. Here is data on the world's use of metals. In 1972, we were here. We said it's necessary to slow down. And of course, things got faster. The result is that the globe is now following the overshoot path, not the sustainable path. And that's confirmed in many ways. For example, recently the National Research Institute in Australia, CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific Industrial Research Organization, studied the last 30 years of history of global development and compared it with all the different scenarios from our book. And as far as one can make these judgments at a global scale, the real data show that we're tracking right along the overshoot path. This work was done in 2000. Recently, they did another 10 years of study and reached the same results. Therefore, we have grown far past the globe's sustainable limits. This concept of carrying capacity is a very difficult one. It depends on many political, technical, biological, and other factors which we don't understand very well. Probably the best work has been done by Mathis Wackernagel, a Swiss scientist who tries to understand the globe's total use of energy and materials in comparison with what could be sustained over the long term. He coined the term global ecological footprint, and his calculations show the following. In 1972, when our book came out, the globe was at about 85% of sustainable levels. In those days, it was still possible to imagine slowing down and achieving sustainability. But now we are at about 160% of sustainable levels, and the rate is actually accelerating. It's no longer possible to imagine simply slowing down. We have to get back down. That is politically and economically a totally different kind of challenge. We bring to that challenge, so far, this box called sustainable development. The term, of course, was brought into widespread use through the Brundtland Commission. It put forth the idea that sustainable development is something which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Now, this is a definition which politicians love because it says basically you can have everything you want now, and plus everybody in the future can have what they want. No necessity to make trade-offs. The definition was an advance in that it started to talk at least about the connection between the present generation and future generations. But as you see, it assumed that somehow there wasn't a necessary trade-off. I think this was a good starting point in 1987, but now it's not relevant anymore. And in addition, we have begun to add many other ideas to the concept of sustainable development. When you hear a political or a corporate leader today talking about sustainable development, they mean something more. They mean, for example, that the rich should be able to keep what they have, maybe even get more. You don't ever hear any leader talking about sustainable development being a path which is going to reduce the GNP per capita for their own voters. Of course, we recognize that although we should keep what we have, the poor need to come up. It's not fair that there should be so many poor people in the world. So sustainable development obviously means that they can rise to our standards. And the nice thing is, implicitly, we assume this is going to happen without any changes in our current system. The markets, the finance, the politics can remain more or less the same. We're going to find somehow solutions for sustainable development inside the current box. Minor changes in carbon taxes, maybe some feed-in tariffs to promote renewable energy, minor adaptations of the electoral system, but basically it's a current system. And the magical way of doing this will be with new technologies that decouple, they unlink growth from impact on the environment. So we'll continue to have growth, but we're just going to use less and less energy and materials, damage the environment less, and so forth. And the final assumption, which we automatically have these days, is that more growth is going to give us the resources to do all this. It's a fantasy. It's a politically convenient, psychologically reassuring fantasy. I mean, think about it. How suddenly growth, which has caused a lot of problems over the last 40 years, is suddenly going to start solving these problems. If you start to press anybody on this, they are not able to tell you how that's going to happen. Where empirical research has been done, some excellent research has been done in the United Kingdom, for example, we find that this concept of decoupling has no empirical basis. When the GNP goes up, energy and resource use go up. They may go up slightly slower if you're achieving efficiencies, but there's no absolute decoupling. And the myth of technology is easy to see. Most people now understand that we need to reduce CO2 emissions. Indeed, of course, there is in Doha at this moment thousands of people coming together from around the world to understand how that might happen. Despite that we want CO2 to go down, it keeps going up. It's rising now faster than ever before in history. Why? CO2 emissions is a result of four factors: the number of people, the living standard of those people, the amount of capital that they have, their cars, their houses, their beautiful meeting rooms, and so forth, the amount of energy required to operate the capital, and the fraction of that energy which comes from fossil fuels, because combustion of fossil fuels is a principal, not the only, but a principal source of CO2. Germany has been a leader in its concern for climate change. It's a leader in its implementation of renewable energy. What's happened is there have been enormous efforts and some success to increase efficiency and to shift from fossil to non-fossil energy sources. But we consider that the number of people is outside our control, and we take it as a matter of faith that the living standard has to keep going up. When you overlook population and living standard growth and focus only on efficiency and renewables, you have no possibility to stop the growth of CO2. We haven't managed to do it so far, and we're not going to do it in the future until we begin to focus more on the social, the demographic, and the cultural factors. So what? Well, then, because we haven't done this, we need to understand that we're moving into a period which is going to see a great deal more change. We will look back 20 or 30 years from now on this period from 1950 up to 2000 as having been unusually calm, unusually supportive of growth and progress. We're moving into a period of intense climate change. This is a computer-generated graph of the world in the period 2030 to 2039. These things are quite uncertain, of course, but they're better than simply guessing about it, and they show the areas in dark red and black as intense drought. I actually fished this map off the web when I was speaking in Russia. I wanted to try and get the Russians to start taking climate change seriously. A hopeless effort, I must say, but that's what I was trying to do. And I said to them, you have two choices. You can either start worrying about climate change, or you can start learning Chinese. This area in China produces 65% of China's grain. And if it becomes impossible to produce much agriculture there, those Chinese are going to move up into the region which is still relatively well watered. They're doing it already. But as I looked at the graph, I could see that I better start learning Spanish, because also this area in Spain or in Mexico is producing a lot of food, and it's going to become difficult. So we're going to start seeing a lot of change. Even the Wall Street Journal starts to talk now about volatility. This is from last week's front page of the second section. And you see it in the data. If you collect information on natural disasters from 1900 up to 2010, you see that we're in a period of rapid change. So what? Well, it means that we need to work as hard as we can to reduce climate change. We need to work as hard as we can to find alternative energy sources, but we have to recognize that we're not going to maintain what we have, and that we're moving into a period of enormous unsettlement and change. It gives really two priorities. One is to start thinking about lifestyles which have much less energy and material use. That's actually an interesting and positive opportunity. Sometime on a piece of paper, list the 4 or 5 things that make you most happy. Love, health, self-understanding, the ability to walk down a street at night without worrying about your personal safety. These are the things which are important to people, and in most cases they don't require a lot of energy and materials. If we can restructure our governance systems to start pursuing those things instead of simply blindly and endlessly trying to expand the GNP, I think we can achieve both improved welfare as well as drastic reductions. The second urgent task is to start thinking about the concept of resilience. Preparing our systems all the way from the home, the family, the organization, the city, and up to survive and prosper under periods of intense shock. Resilience is the ability to absorb a shock quickly and to regain the ability to perform essential functions. New York City now for the first time starts to think about this concept of resilience. If the system continues to perform after the shock, we say it's stable. If it stops but then springs back, we say it's flexible. There are ways to assess the flexibility of our current systems and ways to increase them. Some of those ways cost a lot, and some of them cost practically nothing at all. It simply requires that you ask the question. That will be an area of great profit. And we need to get started because we have been in a period where there has been a strong pursuit of efficiency, profit. And it's unfortunately the case that when you increase the efficiency of a system, trying to maximize its short-term results, you tend to reduce its resilience. The Japanese industry found that out. The most efficient way to produce a particular part for an automobile is to create one factory someplace which produces all of those parts for all cars in the world. It's very efficient, but if you have a Fukushima, which eliminates the factory from operation, or if you have, for example, a flood in Thailand, which inundates a factory which is very efficient at producing computer hard drives, then suddenly the system appears to be quite brittle. We need now to start thinking how we can move from out here back into this region. Relatively good efficiency, but with a great deal more resilience. That, I think, is a challenge for the next 40 years. And if we can simply quit being preoccupied with sustainable development, then for sure there are many interesting things to do. Thank you.